What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And it's that time already. We have the first of two United States Regional Championships going on this weekend, and this coming fresh off the heels of the European Regional Championship, which just concluded last week. So a little bit of a difference from the last time around, where the first United States Regional Championship and the first European Regional Championship, which of course the Europe Regional Championship happened first. There was at least a few weeks in between them, so players had plenty of time to kind of adjust for the new meta game and kind of figure out, okay, exactly, what has some legs, what isn't actually working in this format. And players aren't going to get that much time this time around. I mean, literally just a few days before deck submissions are due. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens in the standard metagame, how players kind of correct course for what they would expect the metagame to be. And of course, we covered a lot of things that happened in the European Regional Championship. We broke down the entire event, the day one, day two metagame breakdown, win rates of the individual decks, checked out some very interesting matchup matrix here, where we had certain win rates against certain other decks in the format. Of course, also covering the top 8. So if you want any information to do with the European Regional Championship, it's going to be kind of a good benchmark for what we're going to expect at this year, the first United States Regional Championship, because I don't really expect a lot of change from that metagame. Maybe more towards the top, maybe some of the other, decks that we perceive to be top players in the metagame kind of fall off a little bit in favor of some of these new strategies. But all in all, I don't expect there to be too much of a stark difference, knock on wood. But that's going to make it pretty easy for us here, because in this video, instead, we're just going to be covering some of our takes and predictions for the first United States Regional Championship. So, feel free to hang out with me, leave your takes down in the comments down below. I would love to hear kind of your thoughts, maybe expectations for this regional championship, because it's going to end up being a fantastic event and going to definitely give us a fairly good snapshot of what this standard metagame is going to look like going forward, and what the decks are going to be to beat, and the changes that are going to have to take place over the course of the next few weeks before we get to the second United States Regional Championship. But before we get into any of our takes here in this video, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk a lot about the modern standard format as well as some other longer form videos, we do these event breakdowns for all the major regional championships, all the pro tours, all the world championships, all things of that nature. So if you want any more of that content, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want even more content, you can go to the description down below. I got a few different links down there. I have a link to my Discord server. You can go ahead and join over there. I have a Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/Crowday23, where we stream mainly like 99.9% of the time Magic the Gathering. I do kind of want to play some video games because there's some sweet games coming out, but we're going to be focusing mainly on Magic the Gathering over there. We're going to be playing a lot of standard here and really getting a feel for this Is It Aggro deck that it just seems to be flying around everywhere nowadays. I also have a podcast over at the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel, where we have my co-host Randy over at MTG with Randy break down a lot of the same things we're going to see here. We're going to be breaking down the regional championships here, giving some of our own predictions and going over the metagame, and even occasionally playing a lot of the top decks in the metagame against each other to kind of build our own idea, and so you can kind of see those decks in action. So, if that's something that you should go over there and check out the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If you use my code in the description down below, you'll get 5% off your monthly subscription, where you can, sign up with them. You can rent cards for Magic the Gathering online and play in their various different events, such as different leagues and challenges, to where you can potentially qualify for the Pro Tour through the online circuit. So if that's something that interests you, go ahead and use my code in the description down below for 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor to the channel. Now let's go ahead and get into some of our predictions for the first United States Regional Championships here taking place this weekend. So the first place we're going to start, and probably the most lukewarm take of all of them, Is It Prowess is going to be the most played deck in the format. Now, we did see back in the European Regional Championship that this deck absolutely exploded. It was like almost 17% of the day one metagame, had the best conversion rate. It just completely dominated the tournament, and I don't expect that to really change here. I mean, there's a lot of good things going on here. Of course, the Slickshot Show-Off is one of the most aggressive creatures that we've seen in quite a long time. We see it, show up in Modern a lot of the time, being in these unfair strategies, abusing using a lot of the free spells that the format offers. And while there isn't necessarily a lot of free spells in the standard format, the fact that we have cards like Monstrous Rage, down here at at 4 copies, and just being able to play Opt and Sleight of Hand and really kind of abuse the fact that we want to play these spells really because we have the card Quarry Steel Cutter, and Slickshot Show Off is just going to get massive boosts from these cards as well, while we're just kind of cantripping through our deck, and of course getting more 1-mana prowess creatures in Monastery Swiftspear and Storm Chaser's Talent. This is just flat out the best deck in the format, and I really don't expect it to really change, and this is going to be pacing the field for the rest of the event. So now here's where things kind of heat up a little bit, and I'm using Jeskai Oculus as the kind of placeholder for this, really because I think this and the Jeskai Control deck are going to be kind of the dark horses of the format. Now, we have Mono Red, we have Esper Self-Bounce. These were the perceived best decks going into the regional championship season. Of course, we've seen the meteoric rise of the Izzet aggro deck, and that's definitely going to be a threat for the rest of the season, as we had just stated. But I think the Jeskai Oculus deck and the Jeskai Control decks have a pretty decent shot at probably winning one of these regional championships. Now, do I think that they're going to be up towards the top of the metagame? No, I think players here early on are still going to gravitate towards these self-bounce decks, still against the mono red aggro decks, as we're going to definitely get to those here later on in this video. But I think we're going to slowly see these decks kind of creep up. I do like things like the Jeskai Oculus deck. I think can just output a ton of damage. It's definitely it's still doing obviously the Oculus plus Helping Hand sort of thing that we've seen the Azorius Oculus decks do. That's definitely not anything up for debate. That is not a powerful thing. But this deck has shifted into being more of a Proph's Eidetic Memory deck, where you're just going to try to draw a decent amount of cards and then put counters on your creatures and just be able to close out games very quickly. Looking at cards like Steam Core Scholar and, of course, Tersa Light Shatter, which are going to allow you to draw cards when you play them, and, of course, kind of fit on curve. I mean, playing a Steam Core Scholar on turn 3 after you play a Proph's Eidetic Memory is going to help you out very nicely, especially if you can get Marauding Mako going as well early on, because then you're just going to be able to put a counter on this after you play the Profs, and then you're going to play Steam Core Scholar, discard 2 cards, put counters on the Mako, put more counters on the Scholar, and then you have 2 4/4s in play on turn 3, which is a lot of damage, again, when you consider that now future Steam Core Scholars, future Tersa Light Shatters, things of those natures, even Glacial Dragon Hunt being this card that is able to, draw you a card, and then you're going to be able to discard a card, you're going to be able to trigger the Mako, you're going to be able to obviously draw a card to trigger the Proph's Eidetic Memory to put more counters on your creature, but it's also going to be interaction for your opponent. You're going to be able to deal 3 damage to target creature. This is also a good card that you can play, after following up with a Tersa or a Steam Core Scholar. You end up putting counters on one of your other creatures, you attack with a Steam Core Scholar, and then second main phase, using it to harmonize to draw and discard, while not obviously ideal, because that means you're going to get 1 less counter on your Proph's Eidetic Memory, but this is a way that you can get in for a good amount of damage, and then also be able to flash this back, give you a little bit of card selection, put a new card into your graveyard, and then be able to kill off one of your opponent's creatures to kind of inhibit any sort of racing strategies here. And of course, these white decks having High Noon, players can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, absolutely just decimating the prowess deck and really kind of putting a stranglehold on what it's able to do, because it's playing a lot of these cheap cards. And when you're playing, 1 opt, every turn, or you're playing a creature and then you're having to play cantrip on the other turn, it's definitely not as powerful as being able to go creature, cantrip, burn spell on, the 3rd or 4th turn of the game. So definitely these decks have a lot of tools. They have a lot of good things going on for them, where, these Jeskai decks really only want to cast 1 spell a turn anyway, if that. And of course, Control just seeming like a very attractive option here in the current standard metagame, to where I would not be surprised if one of these Jeskai decks just eventually found the right formula to deal with the Izzet aggro decks and kind of start to bring things in their favor. As of right now, I think that these decks are, very solid options. I think they are, bordering on these tier 1 strategies. I want to see a little bit more of them before I firmly place them there, but we could see 2 Jeskai decks end up kind of dethroning, or at least being a threat to Mono Red and the Esper Self-Balance decks here early on. I think over the totality of the season, we're going to kind of see these decks sort of rise to the top, and players have to have a game plan, not only for the Izzet aggro deck, but definitely for these Jeskai decks, as they're just going to seemingly be more and more popular. And I mean, a lot of these decks too were performing very, very well at the European Regional Championship, where a lot of them were a threat to make the top 8. Didn't end up getting there. The wheels kind of fell off towards the end, but overall, I think these decks are going to be very exciting to watch here through the rest of the regional championship season. Now, these are maybe they get into a lot hotter of a take, but I think mono red aggro is definitely going to take a very steep step back as we kind of see the aggro deck of the format and kind of the aggro deck that a lot of players are choosing. Are this is an aggro deck? I expect is it aggro to move up in play percentage. I think that's going to come a lot from the mono red players kind of shifting their focus from playing this kind of more all-in creature aggro strategy and going in for this more spell-based aggro strategy. So I think for a lot of people though, like mono red is going to take, I would say, the least hit, all things considered, compared to the Esper self-balance deck. And trust me, we're going to be getting to that here in a moment. But the idea being here that with a lot of players kind of gravitating towards like these Jeskai and these other Proph's Eidetic Memory style decks, it's going to be very hard for, really, if there was going to be a deck that could attack through these, mono red aggro could, I could see it having a very good very good Jeskai Oculus matchup, and even against the certain draws from the Jeskai control deck, I can see mono red aggro being very good here. It's one of the fastest decks that you can play, and one of the most consistently fast decks that you can be playing in this current standard format, and that's really like the edge that it has on the Izzet deck. Now, of course, this deck can also sort of kind of play this mid-range strategy. You are playing a decent amount of burn spells with like Burst Lightning. Actually, this version actually getting rid of Lightning Strike, because that's a card that we would kind of see here, and kind of going for Torch the Tower main deck and Witchstalker Frenzy, which of course works very well with Screaming Nemesis. You don't really see Screaming Nemesis a lot from the Izzet decks, and that can make life pretty hard against some of the Jeskai matchups where, your opponent is just going to gain life through Lightning Helixes and through Bezas and things of that nature, that it could be very difficult to kind of close out games when your opponent gains 7, 10, 13 life. But with Screaming Nemesis, you definitely have the option to deal massive amounts of damage while also having numerous ways of triggering it to deal damage to your opponent and cause them to not be able to gain life for the rest of the game. I don't think that this deck necessarily goes anywhere in terms of, at least not as steep of a decline, but I think it's definitely going to see a decline here and be a deck that players kind of move away from, between the kind of lackluster win rate for the deck relative to how many players actually registered it, to there just being seemingly a better aggro deck that is going to, at multiple stages, feel like a better deck to play, maybe outside of the early game, where of course you have these kind of busted Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse into Monstrous Rage plus burn spell draws. I don't fully expect the mono red aggro deck to fall off a cliff, but I definitely think that its share in the metagame is going to be challenged by Izzet aggro and the rise of some of these other Jeskai decks that just seemingly have a better way of getting to deal with what these mono red aggro decks have going on, is they're pretty well equipped to handle these creature aggro strategies. So definitely something to keep in mind. I think mono red aggro is still going to be up there. It is a deck that is very punishing to play against when they kind of get their game plan going, and you're just kind of stuck playing like tap lands or really not doing anything on the early turns of the game. You're just going to absolutely 100% unequivocally punish your opponent, where there's some draws from the Izzet aggro deck where you're not going to be able to adequately do that sort of thing, where this deck is going to be able to do it from the jump. So it's going to be interesting to see where this deck kind of goes as we kind of progress through the metagame, but I do expect this deck to kind of start to take a little bit of a decline. I think we're going to see it still in probably the top 5, but I don't know if it's going to survive much of that anyway. So let's go into our last take, because I think that's probably going to be the hottest, maybe the most controversial take, which is going to be the Esper self-bounce deck completely just cratering and falling off of a cliff. Look, I think that Esper self-bounce has a lot of very good draws to it, and we're kind of seeing it take a little bit more of an aggressive slant here, not necessarily in this deck, where we see like Entity Tracker is like a really good way for it to kind of get card advantage while it's kind of doing its thing, where it didn't really need that before. I think Entity Tracker was just kind of like this cool card that we could play, and when we got to do the thing, it was pretty sweet, but it didn't necessarily need it. Now I think it absolutely needs it. I think that just the fact of getting to play these very powerful like enchantments, things like Grim Bubble's an artifact, but Hopeless Nightmare, Storm Chaser's Talent, Momentum Breaker, Nowhere to Run, like just getting to play these cards over and over again just isn't cutting it when players are able to just outgrow things like Nowhere to Run and Grim Bauble pretty early. Especially we see that in the Jeskai Oculus decks. We see the the red strategies adopting Quarry Steel Cutter, which is just a constant stream of creatures where your targeted removal when you're spending actual cards or spending multiple cards to deal with one token that versus the card that's just sitting on the battlefield making those tokens, it's going to make life very difficult. And yes, the draws where you play Hopeless Nightmare 5, 10, 15 times are going to be fantastic, and you're going to look, it's going to look amazing while you're also getting to pressure with these flyers. My problem is I don't think that that's good enough now in Standard. I think that we've kind of started to move past the strategy. I think players are still going to play it. I think that you're going to have the really good players that have been playing it this whole time are going to adjust more to the matchups, relative to like the metagame. But I think overall, as far as like a deck that if you're just looking for something to play, I wouldn't start with Esper unless you have been playing this deck. I wouldn't start with any of the self-bounce decks. I think that we would see maybe more of the black-white self-bounce deck kind of show up more, for the fact that its tools and how it's going to handle those matchups are going to be different from how Esper handles those matchups. But I definitely wouldn't be starting here with Esper. And you know what? Obviously, I could be wrong. There's a very good chance that I could be wrong. This has been an established deck of the metagame, but kind of in the way with Mono Red. At least for Mono Red, you're able to punish a lot of the slow draws. And yes, you can do it with this deck, but I think that there is a lot more pressure coming from Mono Red than there is from this Esper self-bounce deck. So really, if there's a deck that is going to completely fall out of like the top 5 or even the top 6 of the metagame, I think that Esper Self-Bounce is going to be one of those decks. I think players are still going to play Mono Red aggro. There's a lot to really like from the Mono Red aggro strategy. Very consistent mana base. Usually, I would say that, of course, you get hung up on like the variants where it's like, I need more actual red mana, and you draw like 15 Rockface Villages when you can only have like 2 in your deck or 3 that you normally play. But in general, I think that if there's going to be a deck that falls out, it's going to be the Esper self-bounce deck. I think that some of the other variants would be very good, but overall, I don't think this is going to cut it anymore. I think that players are either going to be going for speed for Mono Red and for Is It Aggro, or we're going to see, these other kind of mid-range strategies where I think even Dimir might even be a little bit better of a choice than this Esper self-bounce deck. I think that, the Jeskai decks are going to be a lot better of a choice than this self-bounce deck. So it'll be interesting to see where this deck sits after deck list submission, I believe happens on Thursday. Of course, we're probably not going to see what the metagame actually looks like until, we're decently into the broadcast on that event. So definitely something to look out for and, see what ends up actually happening there. And those are my takes, my thoughts for the regional championship in the United States here. It's going to be an insane event. We're going to see, what players were able to come up with here with such a short turnaround to basically attack the Is It Aggro deck and some of the various other Jeskai decks that are kind of starting to creep up in the metagame here. Definitely a stark contrast to what we expected very early on and what we had kind of seen towards the end of the RCQ season going into this regional championship season. It seems like Tarkir Dragonstorm has done a fantastic job of kind of leveling out the metagame. Obviously, there's still some concerns with the cards that we had taken issue with very early on. I still think Monstrous Rage is a brutal card to be playing against, and players still kind of, playing these different aggro decks, but this is kind of the, consistency, it seems like, across the spells-based, the more creature-based aggro decks. Of course, the, This Town Ain't Big Enough is also kind of a very interesting card, even though decks aren't really playing this card anymore, players aren't really playing the Up the Beanstalk anymore. I think it's very clear that this metagame is shifting to just getting faster and faster rather than trying to be grindier and more mid-range, even though we have, again, Jeskai Control and Jeskai Oculus kind of rounding out like the back end of those top 5 decks. But, of course, let me know what you think in the comments down below, what you expect from this regional championship. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comments down below. If you think one of the decks are pretenders, if you think that there's a deck that we have not shown enough love to, I would love to hear any of that stuff in the comments down below. And if you want to check out this event, it is going to be going on Saturday and Sunday, of course, on the Star City Games coverage channel on YouTube. I think that's the best place to watch, as you're able to rewind and, end up playing at like 2, 3, 4 times speed, whatever, to kind of get yourself caught up to the live action. And of course, you can also watch over on twitch.tv/SCG Tour, where they're going to be streaming that event over there as well. It's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to see what happens. And as a content creator, I really hope that this standard format does kind of correct itself very quickly, as I think Standard right now is in one of the healthiest places, while Modern kind of slowly burns thanks to Boros Energy, like consistently just being a good deck even after getting cards banned out of it. So that's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. Again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider throwing a subscribe my way, as, It helps out the channel, helps us grow, puts us in the algorithm, things like that. I do greatly appreciate that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.